I promise I'll always protect you.
I know you will.
I love you both so much.
We love you too.
Subscribe to Wild West Soul Stories. Hit the bell, like, comment, and share. Thanks for watching. The Wyoming Territory stretched endlessly beneath skies painted in shades of amber and violet as the sun began its descent behind the distant mountains. In the small town of Copper Springs, where everyone knew everyone's business and secrets rarely stayed buried, two broken souls were about to find salvation in each other's pain. Eliza Thornton stood at her husband's grave, her hand resting protectively over the swell of her belly. 6 months pregnant and 3 months widowed, she had become the subject of pitying glances and whispered conversations that stopped whenever she entered the general store. Her husband Marcus had been thrown from his horse during a cattle drive, leaving her alone with a farm she could not manage, and a child who would never know its father's face. She wiped the tears from her weathered cheeks, her calloused hands evidence of the hard work she had been doing alone. The autumn wind carried the scent of approaching winter, and she knew that survival would become even more difficult once the snow arrived. What she did not know was that someone had been watching her from a distance, his heart breaking with every tear she shed. Samuel Crawford had returned to Copper Springs 6 months earlier, carrying wounds that no one could see. He had left this town 12 years ago as a young man full of dreams, determined to build a cattle empire in Montana. He had succeeded beyond his expectations, accumulating wealth that most men only dreamed about. But all the gold in the world could not buy him what he wanted most. He was barren. The doctor in Helena had confirmed what Samuel had suspected after years of marriage to his first wife. She had eventually left him for another man, unable to bear the shame of a childless marriage. Her parting words had cut deeper than any knife. What kind of man cannot give his wife children? You are less than a man, Samuel. You are nothing. Those words echoed in his mind every single day, haunting his nights and poisoning his mornings. He had sold everything and returned to Copper Springs, hoping to find peace in the land of his childhood. Instead, he had found Eliza. He watched her now as she placed wildflowers on her husband's grave, and something stirred in his chest that he had thought long dead. She was beautiful in her grief, strong in her vulnerability. Her auburn hair caught the dying light, and her green eyes held a sorrow that matched his own. Samuel had been watching her for weeks, noticing how she struggled to lift hay bales, how she worked from dawn until darkness fell, how she refused to accept charity from neighbors who offered it. He had seen her collapse in exhaustion behind her barn one evening, crying into her hands until there were no tears left, and he had fallen in love with her completely. But what could he offer her? A man who could not father children, a man whose first wife had declared him worthless. The shame burned in his gut every time he thought about approaching her. Yet he could not stay away. Eliza felt his presence before she saw him. When she turned, she found Samuel Crawford standing at the edge of the cemetery, his hat in his hands, his dark eyes filled with an emotion she could not name. "Mr. Crawford," she said, her voice carrying the weariness of months of grief and labor. "I did not hear you approach. Forgive me, Mrs. Thornton. I did not mean to intrude on your private moment." She studied him carefully. She had heard the gossip about the wealthy rancher who had returned to Copper Springs. Some said he had been ruined by gambling. Others whispered about a failed marriage. No one seemed to know the truth, and Samuel Crawford never corrected any of the rumors. "You are not intruding," she said quietly. "Marcus has been gone long enough that I should not still be crying over his grave. People probably think I have lost my mind. People should mind their own affairs," Samuel replied, moving closer. "Grief has no timeline, Mrs. Thornton. Anyone who says otherwise has never truly loved and lost." His words surprised her. There was a depth of understanding in them that suggested personal experience with loss. "Did you know my husband?" she asked. "Not well. We were boys together before I left Copper Springs. He was a good man from what I remember." "He was." Her voice cracked. He would have been a wonderful father. Samuel's chest tightened painfully at her words. I have no doubt of that. They stood in silence for a moment, the wind carrying fallen leaves across the cemetery grounds. Finally, Eliza spoke again. Why are you here, Mr. Crawford? This is not the first time I have noticed you watching me. Heat rose to Samuel's face. He had thought he was being discreet, but apparently he had failed miserably. I apologize if I have made you uncomfortable. That was never my intention. You have not made me uncomfortable, she admitted. I am simply curious. A man like you, with means and position, surely has better things to do than observe a struggling widow. Samuel looked at the ground, then back at her face. The truth was lodged in his throat, desperate to escape, but terror held it captive. Perhaps I see something in you that reminds me of myself, he finally said. And what might that be? Someone who has been broken by life but refuses to stop fighting. Eliza's eyes filled with fresh tears. No one had described her situation so accurately before. Everyone saw her as a victim, someone to pity. But Samuel saw her strength, even when she could not see it herself. I do not feel like a fighter, she whispered. Most days I feel like giving up, but you never do. You rise every morning, you tend to your farm, you prepare for your child's arrival. That is fighting, Mrs. Thornton. That is courage in its purest form. Something shifted between them in that moment. The barrier of polite conversation crumbled, and two lonely souls recognized each other. Over the following weeks, Samuel began appearing at Eliza's farm. He never asked permission. He simply arrived each morning and set to work repairing fences, tending livestock, and completing the tasks that had become impossible for her to manage alone. At first, she protested. I cannot pay you, she said firmly, standing on her porch with her arms crossed. I am not asking for payment. Then what do you want? Samuel paused, hammer in hand, and met her eyes. I want to be useful to someone. Is that so difficult to believe? She had no response to that. So she allowed him to help, and gradually her resistance melted into acceptance, and acceptance blossomed into something warmer. They began sharing meals together. Samuel would bring supplies from town, and Eliza would cook simple dinners that somehow tasted better than anything he had eaten in years. They talked for hours about everything and nothing. She told him about her childhood in Missouri, about meeting Marcus at a church social, about the dreams they had shared for their future. Samuel shared stories of his years in Montana, carefully omitting certain details. He spoke of the land, the cattle, the satisfaction of building something from nothing. But he never mentioned his failed marriage, and he never spoke of his shame, until one evening when Eliza asked the question he had been dreading. Why did you really come back to Copper Springs, Samuel? A man does not abandon success without reason. They were sitting on her porch, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. The baby had been kicking actively all evening, and Eliza kept pressing her hand to her belly with a mixture of wonder and sadness. Samuel was silent for a long moment. The truth sat heavy in his chest, a stone he had been carrying for too many years. I was married before, he began slowly. Her name was Catherine. She was beautiful and ambitious, and she wanted the one thing I could not give her. Eliza turned to look at him, her eyes questioning. Children, Samuel continued, his voice breaking on the word. I cannot father children, Eliza. I am barren. When the doctors confirmed it, Catherine stayed for 2 more years, growing angrier and more resentful with each passing month. Eventually, she told me I was less than a man, and left me for someone who could give her what I would not. Tears streamed down his cheeks now, and he made no effort to hide them. The shame he had carried alone for so long poured out of him in waves. I sold everything because none of it mattered anymore. What good is an empire with no heir? What good is a legacy when it dies with you? I came back here because I had nowhere else to go. I came back here to disappear. Eliza reached out and took his hand, her touch gentle and warm. "You are not less than a man, Samuel. You are more of a man than most I have known." "How can you say that? I cannot give a woman the one thing that matters most." Eliza was quiet for a moment, considering her words carefully. "My husband gave me this child," she said softly, placing Samuel's hand on her belly. "But he cannot be here to raise it. This baby will be born into a world without a father. Marcus gave me the seed of life, but he cannot give our child what it truly needs: love, protection, a steady hand to hold when things become difficult. Do you understand what I am telling you?" Samuel felt the baby kick against his palm, and something cracked open inside him. "Eliza, being a father is not about blood, Samuel. It is about showing up every single day. It is about choosing a child as your own and loving it with everything you have. The fact that you cannot create life does not mean you cannot nurture it." For the first time in years, Samuel felt something other than shame. He felt hope, but fear still gripped him. He pulled his hand away and stood abruptly. "I should go. It is getting late." "Samuel, wait." But he was already walking toward his horse, fleeing from the possibility of happiness because he did not believe he deserved it. 3 days passed. Samuel did not come to the farm. Eliza found herself looking toward the road constantly, waiting for the sound of hooves that never came. She had shared too much. She had frightened him away. On the 4th day, she forced herself to accept that he was not coming back. She was in the barn, struggling to lift a bale of hay, when sharp pain shot through her lower back. She cried out and dropped to her knees, terrified that something was wrong with the baby. That was how Samuel found her. He had spent 3 days riding the hills surrounding Copper Springs, wrestling with his demons. He had finally made a decision, and he had ridden straight to her farm to tell her. "Eliza!" He ran into the barn, dropping to his knees beside her. "What happened? Is it the baby?" "I do not know," she gasped. "I lifted something I should not have." Without hesitation, Samuel gathered her in his arms and carried her to the house. He placed her gently on the bed and covered her with quilts. "I am going to town for the doctor. Do not move." "Samuel, wait." She grabbed his hand before he could leave. "Please do not go. Please stay with me." He saw the terror in her eyes, and he understood. She was afraid of being alone. He sat beside her on the bed, holding her hand as the pain slowly subsided. An hour passed, then 2. The cramping eased, and the baby's movements resumed their normal patterns. By morning, Eliza was exhausted but no longer frightened. "You stayed," she whispered. "I will always stay," he replied. "That is what I came to tell you." He knelt beside the bed, still holding her hand, and the words he had rehearsed 100 times umbled out in a rush of emotion. "Eliza, I have nothing to offer you but a damaged heart and a shameful secret. I cannot give you more children. I cannot give you what other men could. But I can give you everything else. I can give you my strength, my protection, my devotion. I can give your child a father who will love it as if it were my own flesh and blood. I can give you a partnership built on honesty and respect." Tears spilled down Eliza's cheeks as she listened. "Please help bury my shame and marry me," Samuel pleaded, his voice raw with desperation and hope. "Let me be useful. Let me belong to someone. Let me love you and your child for as long as I live. I know I am asking too much. I know you deserve better. But I am begging you, Eliza, give me a chance to prove that I am more than my failures." Eliza pulled herself up in the bed and cupped his face in her hands. "Do you truly want this?" she asked. "A ready-made family? A child that carries another man's name? The burden of a widow's memories?" "I want all of it," Samuel said fiercely. "Every burden, every memory, every sleepless night, and every difficult day. I want the chance to build something beautiful from both of our broken pieces." Eliza leaned forward and pressed her lips to his, a kiss that tasted of tears and promise and new beginnings. "Yes," she whispered against his mouth, "I will marry you, Samuel Crawford, and together we will bury all our shame so deep that neither of us will ever find it again." They were married 2 weeks later in the small church where Eliza had married Marcus years before. The townspeople whispered, as townspeople always do, but Eliza and Samuel heard nothing but tea. Words that bound them together. When their daughter was born on a snowy December night, Samuel held her in his trembling arms and wept without shame. "She is beautiful," he said, looking at Eliza with reverence. "She's perfect." "She is yours," Eliza replied. "In every way that matters, she is yours." Samuel looked down at the tiny face, at the eyes that would one day look to him for guidance, at the hands that would one day reach for him in trust. "I will never let her down," he promised. "I will never let either of you down." And he never did. They raised 3 children together over the years, taking in orphans from nearby towns who needed exactly what Samuel had to give. Their home became known throughout the territory as a place of love and second chances. And on Samuel's grave, decades later, Eliza had carved the words he had once spoken to her in shame. "A father is not made by blood, but by choice. He chose us all." That was his legacy. That was his empire. And it was worth more than all the gold in the world.